I never expected that a plumbing disaster in my apartment building would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. For years, my world was a small, predictable loop: my apartment, my freelance web design work, and the quiet solitude that had become my closest companion. It was a safe life, but it was a lonely one, and I had long since accepted that this was simply my reality. Then a burst pipe and a man in a towel showed me just how wrong I was. My name is Miles. At the time, I was 28, and my days were measured in pixels and lines of code. I worked from a small desk in the corner of my living room, with a view of the brick wall of the building next door. My apartment was my sanctuary, neat, organized, and silent. It was a reflection of the way I tried to live my life, with minimal fuss and even less emotional risk. I had friends, of course, but my work kept me isolated, and I had a tendency to retreat into myself, building walls that felt more like a fortress than a home. The routine was comfortable. I'd wake up, make coffee, and sit at my desk by 7. I'd work until lunch, take a brief walk if the weather was nice, and then work again until my eyes felt strained and tired. Evenings were for quiet dinners, reading, and the endless scroll of the internet. It was a life lived at a distance, observing the world through a screen. And for a long time, I thought that was enough. Then Caleb moved into the apartment across the hall, Unit 4B. From the moment I first saw him, he felt like a disruption to my carefully curated quiet. He was everything I wasn't. He seemed to fill the hallway with his presence alone, broad-shouldered and confident, often with a fine layer of sawdust clinging to his dark hair and the shoulders of his flannel shirts. I learned from a brief, hallway-breezing chat with our building manager that he was a custom furniture maker. It suited him. He looked like a man who built things with his hands, strong and capable. I would see him coming and going, sometimes carrying planks of beautiful, raw wood, other times carrying nothing but a gym bag. He always had a friendly, easy smile. He'd nod at me, a simple hey. That for some reason always made my heart perform a little stutter step. He was, in a word, beautiful. The kind of beautiful that felt like it belonged on a movie screen or a magazine cover, not in the dimly lit hallway of my nondescript apartment building. In my mind, he was completely, unequivocally unattainable. I cataloged every detail I could glean from our fleeting encounters. He had a small scar that cut through his left eyebrow, visible only when the light hit just right. His eyes were a warm hazel, the color of moss and whiskey, and they crinkled at the corners when he smiled. I told myself my fascination was purely aesthetic, an artist's appreciation for a well-made form. But that was a lie I told myself to keep my heart in its carefully guarded box. He represented a world I only observed. A world of physical confidence, of easy social grace, of a life lived out in the open. I was certain he was straight. I had no evidence, of course, other than the powerful, unfounded assumptions that my own anxiety provided. He was the handsome, friendly neighbor, and I was the quiet, solitary guy across the hall. We existed in different orbits, and I was content, or so I told myself, to simply watch him pass by, a brief, bright spot in my otherwise monochrome existence. That was our dynamic, our unspoken arrangement. Until one Friday evening, when the sound of shouting and rushing water shattered the peace of the 4th floor. The inciting incident, when it came, wasn't dramatic in a cinematic way. There was no fire, no grand explosion. It was far more mundane, yet it had the same effect on my life. It started with a frantic knock on my door. It was well past 9 o'clock, and I was already winding down, preparing to retreat into the weekend solitude I both craved and dreaded. An unexpected knock at this hour was an anomaly, and it immediately set my nerves on edge. I peered through the peephole, my heart giving a familiar, unwelcome lurch when I saw who it was. Caleb. He was standing there, his hair damp and sticking to his forehead, looking stressed and agitated. He was wearing a dark t-shirt that was splotched with water and a pair of worn jeans. He scrubbed a hand over his face, his usual easygoing demeanor completely gone, replaced by a raw frustration. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the sudden flutter in my chest, and opened the door. "Hey," I managed, my voice sounding thinner than I would have liked. "Is everything okay?" He blew out a breath, gesturing helplessly back toward his own apartment, from which I could now hear a faint but persistent sound of gushing water. "Not really, man." A pipe burst in the wall behind my shower. It's a mess. The water is everywhere. He looked utterly defeated. The building super just shut off the water to my whole unit, but the damage is done. My bedroom and bathroom are basically flooded. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, a useless sentinel in my own doorway. Wow, that's terrible, I offered lamely. He nodded, his gaze meeting mine. It was the first time we'd ever looked at each other for more than a passing second. In his eyes, I saw not just frustration, but a kind of desperate exhaustion. Yeah, and the emergency plumber can't do the major repair until Monday morning. So I'm without water for the whole weekend. He paused, and a flicker of awkwardness crossed his face. This was clearly difficult for him. The confident, self-assured man from the hallway was gone, replaced by someone vulnerable. Let me explain something. I'm not good in these situations. I'm not the kind of person who instinctively knows how to help. My first impulse is to retreat, to offer a sympathetic platitude, and then close the door, sealing myself back inside my safe, predictable world. But looking at Caleb standing there, looking so lost, I felt a different impulse rise up. It was a quiet, hesitant desire to be useful, to be kind. He hesitated for another moment before finally getting to the point. Look, this is a huge thing to ask, and please feel free to say no, but I was wondering if I could possibly use your shower tomorrow. Just to, not be a complete hermit all weekend. He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. I can be in and out. Super quick. I promise I won't be a bother. My mind was racing. Caleb, in my apartment, in my shower. The idea sent a jolt through me that was equal parts panic and a strange, thrilling excitement. It was a disruption of the highest order, a tear in the very fabric of my routine. My carefully constructed walls were being politely asked to open their gates. For a moment, my anxiety screamed at me to make an excuse. But then I looked at his face again, at the genuine stress etched around his eyes, and the kinder part of me won out. Of course, I heard myself say, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess them. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you need it. It's no problem at all. Relief washed over his features so completely, it was like watching a storm cloud dissipate. His shoulders, which had been tense and high, relaxed. Really? Man, thank you. You're a lifesaver. Seriously, don't worry about it, I said, trying to sound as casual as he did, though my pulse was hammering against my ribs. It's the least I can do. What are neighbors for, right? It sounded like a line from a cheesy television show, but he smiled, a real smile this time, and the effect was dazzling. It lit up his whole face, chasing away the last of the tension. Thanks, Miles, he said, using my name for the first time. The sound of it in his voice was unexpectedly intimate. I really appreciate it. He told me he was going to try and salvage what he could from his soaked bedroom floor and would probably come by in the morning. I nodded. We said our goodnights, and I closed the door, leaning my forehead against the cool wood. My quiet, orderly world had just been breached. And as I stood there, listening to the silence of my own apartment, I realized with a jolt of alarm that I wasn't scared. I was hopeful. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of nervous anticipation I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. It was absurd. A neighbor was coming over to use my shower. It was a simple, mundane act of neighborly kindness. But my mind, true to form, had already spun it into an event of monumental significance. I cleaned the bathroom as if preparing for a royal inspection, scrubbing surfaces that were already clean and hiding my generic brand shampoo, as if it were a source of deep personal shame. Caleb texted around 10, asking if it was a good time. My heart did a little flip. I texted back a casual, "Yep, come on over," while trying to control the tremor in my fingers. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, he was standing there with a small duffel bag and a neatly folded towel slung over his shoulder. He looked tired but less stressed than the night before. "Morning," he said, offering a small, grateful smile. "Thanks again for this." "It's nothing," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on in. The bathroom is just down the hall to the left." He stepped inside, and my small apartment suddenly felt even smaller with him in it. He seemed to take up all the air, all the space. He smelled faintly of damp drywall and sawdust, a scent that was surprisingly pleasant, earthy, and real. He paused in the living room, his eyes scanning the space. He looked at my bookshelves, crammed with sci-fi paperbacks and design theory texts, and then at my desk, with its dual monitors and organized clutter. "This is a nice place," he said, his voice sincere. "It feels calm." "It's quiet," I said with a shrug. "Good for working." It felt like an admission of my own solitary nature. He nodded, his gaze lingering on a framed print I had on the wall. A minimalist, abstract cityscape. "I like your art." "Oh, thanks," I said, surprised. "It's just something I liked." He didn't move toward the bathroom right away. Instead, he lingered, as if he wanted to talk. "So, you're a web designer?" The super mentioned it. I nodded. "Freelance. I build websites for small businesses, mostly." I felt the need to downplay it, as if it were somehow less impressive than building tangible things from wood. "That's cool," he said, his interest seeming genuine. "It takes a specific kind of brain for that, I think. All that code and logic." He then gestured vaguely at himself. "I'm better with my hands. If I can't see it and touch it, it doesn't make much sense to me." That was my opening. I wanted to know more about what he did, to see beyond the surface-level image I had created of him. "What kind of furniture do you make?" I asked. "Is it all custom work?" His face lit up. It was a subtle shift, but the passion was unmistakable. "Yeah, mostly restoration, actually. I find old, broken-down pieces, dressers, tables, chairs, things people are throwing out, and I bring them back to life." He spoke about dovetail joints and the grain of different woods, of the patience it took to strip away layers of old paint to find the original beauty underneath. He wasn't just a laborer, he was an artist, a historian of forgotten objects. Listening to him, I felt my perception of him recalibrating. The confident, jock-like persona I had projected onto him began to dissolve, replaced by this thoughtful, passionate craftsman. He was revealing a hidden side, a depth that I found myself drawn to more powerfully than his physical appearance. He was more than just handsome, he was interesting. The conversation flowed easily after that. We talked for nearly 20 minutes, just standing in my living room. He asked about my work, and I found myself explaining the creative satisfaction of seeing a design come to life on screen. He listened intently, nodding, asking smart questions. It felt less like a neighbor making small talk and more like a real conversation, the kind I hadn't had with a new person in years. Eventually, a small, awkward pause fell between us, and he seemed to remember why he was there in the first place. "Right?" he said, gesturing with his thumb toward the hallway. "I should probably, use that shower now. I'm starting to feel like I smell like a swamp." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that surprised me with its ease. "Go for it. Take your time. Towels are in the little closet in there if you need an extra 1 inch. "Thanks, Miles," he said again, his hazel eyes holding my gaze for just a beat too long. There was a warmth in them that felt new, something beyond simple gratitude. It was a small, almost imperceptible moment, but it landed in my chest with significant weight. It felt like the beginning of something, a quiet shift in the foundation of our simple, hallway-based relationship. As he disappeared into the bathroom, and I heard the click of the door, I leaned against the kitchen counter, my mind reeling. The walls I had so carefully built were beginning to feel less like a fortress and more like a prison. And for the first time, I felt a desperate urge to tear them down. I tried to busy myself while he was in the shower. I tidied up the kitchen, which was already tidy. I checked my email, reading the same messages over and over without absorbing a single word. My entire consciousness was focused on the sound of the water running in the other room, on the simple, staggering fact of Caleb's presence in my home. My safe, sterile space was now occupied by this warm, vibrant person, and the contrast was making my head spin. My apartment had never felt so quiet and yet so full at the same time. I could hear the faint spray of the shower head, a rhythmic, steady sound that seemed to count down to a moment I couldn't define. What would happen when he came out? Would we just say a polite goodbye? Would things revert to our silent, nodding acquaintance in the hall? The thought sent a pang of disappointment through me that was sharp and unexpected. I realized, with a startling clarity, that I didn't want that. I wanted more of this. More conversation. More of him. After about 15 minutes, the water shut off. The silence that followed was somehow louder than the noise it replaced. I held my breath, listening. I heard the muffled sound of him moving around, the squeak of the cabinet door where the towels were. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I felt like I was on the precipice of something, a turning point I hadn't seen coming. And then, the bathroom door opened. Caleb appeared in the doorway, framed by the white paint. He had a towel wrapped low around his waist, knotted securely at his hip. His hair was dark and wet, slicked back from his forehead, and droplets of water traced paths down his neck and over his collarbones. He had a broad chest and strong, defined arms, the body of a man who worked with his hands, just as I'd imagined. But it wasn't just the physicality of him that held me captive. It was the look on his face. He looked uncertain, nervous. He took a half step into the hallway, then stopped. He looked at me, his hazel eyes wide and searching. Hey, he started, his voice a low rumble. He reached down and fiddled with the knot of his towel. This is going to sound really stupid. I just stared, unable to form a coherent thought, let alone a sentence. My mind was a complete blank. He tugged at the corner of the terry cloth again, and it did seem to loosen slightly. A shadow of panic, which looked surprisingly genuine, flickered across his face. This knot. I think I tied it wrong. It feels like it's about to, he gestured vaguely downwards. Fall. He looked up at me, his expression a perfect blend of embarrassment and desperate appeal. Could you? God, this is so awkward. Could you just hold it for a second while I try to fix it? My brain finally rebooted. Hold it. Hold his towel. The request was so bizarre, so intimate, that it short-circuited every anxious impulse in my body. Was this real? Was he serious? He looked serious. He looked genuinely distressed, as if he were moments away from being completely exposed in my hallway. I mean, he stammered, his cheeks flushing a faint pink. You could also just let it fall, I guess. Your call, he tried for a joke, a weak, shaky smile that didn't quite land. But the offer hung in the air between us, charged and heavy. Hold it, or let it fall. A choice. He was giving me a choice. My feet moved before my mind gave them permission. I crossed the small distance between us in 2 steps, my world narrowing to the space of a few square feet. I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, smell the clean, soapy scent of my own body wash on him. My hand was trembling as I reached out. I didn't take the whole towel. I just took the corner he was indicating, pinching the thick cotton between my thumb and forefinger. My knuckles brushed against the bare skin of his hip. The contact was electric. It was like a jolt of lightning shot up my arm, straight to my chest. His skin was warm and smooth. He sucked in a sharp breath at the touch, and I knew. I knew in that instant. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't about a faulty knot. This was a question. He looked down at my hand holding the edge of his towel, then back up at my face. His eyes were dark, intense, searching for an answer. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. We stood there for a long moment, frozen in that tableau of manufactured crisis. His hands were hovering near his waist, not fixing anything at all. He was just watching me, waiting. Thanks, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a thank you for helping. It was something else entirely. It was an acknowledgement, a confession. My fingers tightened on the fabric. I didn't let go. I didn't look away. In that charged, silent moment, standing in my hallway with my hand on his towel, the entire dynamic between us shifted. The polite distance, the neighborly kindness, it all evaporated, replaced by a raw, unspoken intimacy that left me breathless. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of my life. Eventually, with a slowness that felt deliberate, he reached down and secured the towel himself with a simple, firm tuck. My hand fell away, but I could still feel the phantom heat of his skin on my fingertips. He cleared his throat, the sound loud in the quiet apartment. All set, he said, his voice still thick with an emotion I couldn't name. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Thanks. You saved me there. Anytime, I whispered, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. The spell was broken, but the echo of it remained, shimmering in the air between us. He quickly retreated back into the bathroom to get dressed, closing the door behind him. I stood frozen in the hallway, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and a wild, burgeoning hope. I replayed the moment again and again. The feigned panic, the absurd request, the look in his eyes, the jolt of his touch. It couldn't have been an accident, but my cautious, self-protective brain refused to fully believe it. What if I was wrong? What if I had imagined the whole thing? When he came out a few minutes later, fully dressed in his jeans and t-shirt, The atmosphere was thick with a new, unspoken tension. The easy camaraderie from before was gone, replaced by a charged awareness. We were no longer just neighbors. We were two people who had shared a moment of profound, wordless intimacy, and neither of us knew what to do next. "Well," he said, slinging his duffel bag over his shoulder, "I should let you get back to your day." He still wasn't looking directly at me, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "Yeah," I said, equally unable to find a comfortable place to look. "Okay." He walked to the door, and I followed. He paused with his hand on the knob, finally turning to face me. "Seriously, Miles. Thanks for everything. The shower, and, his eyes flickered with the memory of the towel incident. For the help. Don't worry about it. I managed." And then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving me alone in the sudden, deafening silence of my apartment. I stood there for a long time, my hand resting on the spot where his hip had been, my entire being buzzing with the aftershock of what had just happened. The turning point had come and gone, and I was left in its wake, adrift in a sea of uncertainty and overwhelming hope. The aftermath was a state of exquisite torture. For the rest of Saturday and all of Sunday, my apartment felt like a cage. My mind, a relentless engine of overanalysis, replayed the towel incident on an infinite loop. Every detail was magnified, scrutinized, and dissected for hidden meaning. The way he'd looked at me, the slight tremor in his voice, the second he'd held my gaze after my hand touched his skin. It was a screenplay I knew by heart, and I watched it over and over, trying to convince myself of the ending. Was it a signal? A clumsy, terrified, beautiful signal? Or was it just a moment of genuine awkwardness that I, in my lonely, hopeful state, had inflated into something more? My internal conflict was a brutal tug of war. Hope would surge, painting a vibrant picture of mutual attraction. In these moments, I was certain. Of course it was intentional. The feigned not problem was a ridiculous, almost comical excuse to create a moment of physical contact, to test the waters, to bridge the gap between us without using words he might not have been ready to say. It was brilliant in its vulnerability. But then, just as quickly, the fear would take over. My anxiety, a familiar and persuasive old friend, would whisper its insidious doubts. "You're projecting. You're seeing what you want to see. He's just a friendly, slightly awkward guy who had a plumbing emergency. You held his towel for 2 seconds. That's it." To him, it was probably nothing, a weird moment he's already forgotten. The thought of having misread the situation so completely was mortifying. I imagined seeing him in the hall again, his face betraying pity or, worse, amusement at the quiet guy across the hall who clearly had a crush on him. I became hyper-aware of every sound from the hallway. The creak of the floorboards, the distant slam of a door, the rumble of the elevator. Each noise sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I found myself peering through my peephole like a spy in a bad movie, hoping for a glimpse of him, and at the same time, dreading it. What would I even do if I saw him? Would we acknowledge what happened with a look? Or would we pretend it never happened, retreating back into our safe, separate worlds? The latter felt like an unbearable loss. On Sunday afternoon, I finally worked up the courage to leave my apartment for groceries. My journey to the elevator was a high-stakes mission. I listened at my door for a full minute, ensuring the coast was clear before I ventured out. The hallway was empty. As I passed his door, Unit 4B, I could hear faint sounds from within, the murmur of a television, the sound of him moving around. He was in there, just a few feet away. The proximity was both a comfort and a torment. The silence between us was a living thing. It was no longer the comfortable, ignorant silence of before. It was a heavy, charged silence, filled with unspoken questions. He had my phone number now, from when he had texted me that morning. He could text. I could text. But what would I say? Hey, about that towel. The thought was absurd. So we remained in our separate bunkers, locked in a standoff of mutual uncertainty. By Sunday evening, I had worked myself into a state of resigned melancholy. I had decided, for the sake of my own sanity, to assume I had imagined it all. It was safer that way. It was a way to protect myself from the crushing disappointment of rejection. I was making dinner, chopping vegetables with methodical precision, trying to force my world back into its old, familiar shape, when I heard it. A knock on the door. It wasn't loud or frantic like it had been on Friday. It was soft, hesitant. My heart stopped. I knew it was him. There was no one else it could be. I put the knife down on the cutting board, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. I walked to the door, my legs feeling unsteady, and took a deep breath before opening it. There he was, Caleb. He was wearing a simple gray hoodie and jeans, his hands shoved into his pockets. He looked profoundly nervous, his gaze fixed on the floor just in front of his feet. The easy confidence he normally wore was completely absent. In its place was a raw, captivating vulnerability that mirrored my own. He had come to end the silence. He finally lifted his head, and his hazel eyes met mine. They were full of apprehension, but also a quiet determination. "Hey," he said, his voice low. Can I come in for a minute? We need to talk." I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and stepped back to let him in. He walked into the living room and stood in the middle of the floor, not as an intruder this time, but as someone who was supposed to be there. I closed the door behind him, and the soft click seemed to seal us in, cutting us off from the rest of the world. The moment of truth had arrived, and I was terrified. He didn't sit down. He just stood there, rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous habit I was beginning to recognize. The silence stretched for a few seconds, thick with everything that had gone unsaid for the past day and a half. I decided I couldn't bear it. If this was going to be a rejection, I wanted it to be over with quickly. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, not really." He finally looked at me, his expression earnest and incredibly open. "I've been going crazy for the last 24 hours, Miles. And I'm pretty sure you have been too." He was right. The directness of it, the simple acknowledgement of our shared tension, was a profound relief. I just nodded, unable to do anything else. "Look," he began, taking a small step closer. "I need to be honest with you. The pipe bursting in my apartment, that was real. A genuinely terrible stroke of luck." He paused, taking a deep breath as if to brace himself. "But the towel thing, that wasn't. The knot was fine. It wasn't going anywhere." The confession hung in the air between us. It was exactly what my hopeful side had screamed, what my anxious side had dismissed as fantasy. Hearing him say it out loud sent a wave of warmth rushing through my chest, chasing away the cold dread. "I am so sorry if that was weird or if I crossed a line," he continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It was a stupid, clumsy plan. But I've wanted to talk to you for months, ever since I moved in. I'd see you in the hall, or sometimes through my window when you were at your desk, and I couldn't figure out how to start a conversation that went beyond hey." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. When the pipe burst, I saw it as an opportunity. A terrible, messy, waterlogged opportunity. And when I was standing there in your hallway, I just panicked. I did the dumbest thing I could think of to see if maybe you felt anything, too. It was a long shot. A really, really long shot. I had to speak. I had to let him know he wasn't alone in this. "It wasn't a long shot," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. "Caleb," I trailed off, searching for the right words. "I've been hoping you'd talk to me since the day you moved in." A wave of relief so profound it was almost visible washed over his face. The tension in his shoulders eased, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across his lips. "Really, really," I confirmed, a smile of my own breaking free. "When you asked me to hold your towel, my heart just about exploded." He let out a real laugh this time, a sound full of relief and joy. "Mine too," he admitted. "My heart was hammering so hard I thought you'd be able to feel it through the floor." He closed the remaining distance between us, stopping just a foot away. The air was buzzing, no longer with tension, but with a palpable, shared excitement. "So," he said softly, his gaze dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second before returning to my eyes. "Just to be perfectly clear, can I kiss you, Miles? Without any stupid excuses about towels or burst pipes." My answer wasn't a word. It was an action. I leaned in and met him halfway. The first kiss wasn't tentative or questioning like the moment in the hallway had been. It was confident, sure, and full of all the hope and anxiety and longing that had been building between us for months. It was soft and gentle at first, a mutual acknowledgement, a confirmation. Then, as he wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me closer, it deepened into something more, a promise of a beginning. It felt like coming home. In that moment, all the walls I had built around my heart didn't just crumble, they turned to dust and blew away. The weeks and months that followed that first kiss felt like waking up from a long, gray dream into a world saturated with color. The quiet solitude of my apartment was replaced by the warm, easy presence of Caleb. My routine, once so rigid and predictable, now had a beautiful, welcome element of chaos. Sometimes I'd wake up to find him in my kitchen, making coffee before heading off to his workshop. Other days, I'd end my workday and find him waiting on my sofa, covered in a light dusting of cedar or oak, smelling like the forest. We spent our time learning the landscapes of each other's lives. I would visit his workshop, a large, dusty space that smelled of sawdust and varnish, and watch in awe as he transformed a battered, forgotten piece of furniture into something beautiful and whole again. He had a patience and a reverence for his work that was captivating. He would explain the history of a piece, the story held within its rings and grain, and I realized he didn't just restore wood, he resurrected stories. In turn, he would sit beside me at my desk, watching with genuine fascination as I wrote code or manipulated designs on my screen. He called it my digital wizardry and celebrated my project completions with the same enthusiasm as if I'd just built a house with my bare hands. He saw the artistry in my logic, the creativity in my structure, in a way no one else ever had. He didn't just accept my world, he entered it willingly and with wonder. Our relationship developed with a natural, unhurried rhythm. We went on dates, to museums, to hole-in-the-wall restaurants, on long walks through the city park. But my favorite moments were the quiet ones, the evenings spent in my apartment, which was slowly becoming our apartment. We'd cook dinner together, our movements becoming a familiar dance in the small kitchen. We'd talk for hours, sharing stories from our pasts, our fears, our dreams for the future. With him, I never felt the need to perform or pretend. I could just be Miles, the quiet, introspective man who loved sci-fi novels and minimalist art, and that was more than enough. One evening, a couple of months after our first kiss, I came home to find a new piece of furniture in my living room. It was a bookshelf, tall and elegant, made from a deep, rich walnut wood. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the joints seamless, the finish smooth as glass. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Caleb was standing beside it, looking prouder than I had ever seen him. "I thought your books deserved a better home than those cheap particle board shelves," he said with a shy smile. It was a gift, a tangible piece of his heart and his talent, now a permanent fixture in our space. Later that night, as we were lying on the sofa, his arm draped around me, the soft glow of a lamp illuminating the new bookshelf, he turned to me. "You know," he said, a playful glint in his eye, "my plumbing is all fixed now. But if you ever need help holding a towel, you know who to call." I laughed, a deep, happy sound that filled the room. I leaned over and kissed him, a gesture that was now as natural as breathing. The memory of that awkward, charged moment in the hallway was no longer a source of anxiety, but a cherished part of our story. It was the ridiculous, terrifying, perfect catalyst for everything that followed. Looking back, I see how easily that moment could have gone differently. I could have let my fear win. I could have made an excuse, closed the door, and retreated back into my safe, lonely world. But I took a chance. I chose to step into the awkwardness, to meet vulnerability with vulnerability. And in doing so, I found a love I never thought was possible for me. It turns out that sometimes, the biggest changes in your life don't announce themselves with a trumpet blast. Sometimes, they knock softly on your door, looking stressed and displaced, and ask for a simple act of kindness that ends up giving you everything.